talking about the biggest stories that matter to you the most. Breaking news, John Calipari is finalizing a 5-year deal to become the Arkansas Razorbacks' next head coach, covering college sports like no one else. The biggest guests in sports. We now welcome in Hall of Famer Jim Calhoun.
Such a pride I had, I came to connect.
The legend, Tim Tebow, joins us.
We'll run it back. I like it.
The legend, Herschel Walker. Welcome in, everybody. A little Sunday night edition, Aaron Torres Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Torres. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody's having a great day. Hope everybody enjoyed what I think was the best college football Saturday of 2024 so far. We did some reaction clips on Saturday, but today, the deep dive Sunday night, Monday morning show, and we got a lot to cover. Alabama beats Georgia. We know about that. I believe Alabama, all of a sudden, back in that national title race, as they are now number one in the polls. Georgia, I do have a question, though. Does Georgia have an Alabama issue, or do they have bigger issues that need to be discussed? From there, we will talk about, how about our guy, big you-know-what, Mark Stoops. That is right, Kentucky stuns Ole Miss, because Mark Stoops, 2 weeks after the punt that wasn't, the punt that was, they stun Ole Miss, and this man deserves all the credit that he has gotten over the last couple days. From there, we're going to go ahead and take a quick break and probably react to the rest of a busy weekend in college football. Colorado, I'm here to tell you, they get better every week. They're going into their bye in a chaotic Big 12. Are they actually the favorites of the Big 12? Plus, we'll talk about the Big 10. That picture is starting to take shape. Army and Navy are undefeated, so we'll talk about that and some other odds and ends because, as I said, it was the best Saturday of the college football season, and I am so fired up to discuss. Throw your comments in the comment section. Don't waste any more time. Share your biggest takeaways from Saturday. It was incredible. We're going to discuss it all. Before we do, obviously, a quick reminder, make sure that you are subscribed to the Aaron Torres Pod and Aaron Torres Pod YouTube channel. New clips, new videos going up every single day on YouTube. We passed 44,000 subscribers over the weekend. I'll be honest, I think we can get to 50 before the start of college basketball season. Can't do it without your support, though. Make sure that you're subscribed to the YouTube channel. Also, make sure that you are subscribed to the podcast feed. Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure that you are subscribed to the Aaron Torres Pod. Oh, by the way, make sure that you're leaving a 5-star rating, a 5-star review. Appreciate everybody's support on the podcast feed as well. We are rocking and rolling. Before we get to today's show, by the way, should mention something else. We have ourselves a new partner, and we are so excited to be working with them. Thank you to Blue Chew, a new sponsor of the Aaron Torres Pod. Fellas, remember back in the day when you were always ready to go? Now you're a little bit older. Things aren't going well. Maybe your football team stinks. Maybe you're an Auburn fan and there's not very much to be excited about, okay? Well, that is where Blue Chew comes in. We are so excited to be working with them. Blue Chew is an online service that delivers the same active ingredients as Viagra, Cialis, and Levitra, but at a fraction of the cost and in chewable form. To get started, it's easy. Just go to BlueChew.com, consult with one of their licensed medical providers, and once you're approved, you'll receive your prescription within days. The best part, it's all done online. No awkward trips to the doctors, no waiting at a pharmacy, no stink eye, no raised eyebrows, no nothing, just results, which is probably what you're thinking. You're probably thinking, Torres, does this stuff actually work? Well, all I can tell you is try it for a month and see. You're going to love it. Your partner's going to love it. Listen, like I said, your football team may stink, but you're going to be rocking between the sheets like you're the 85 Bears, okay? So try it out. It works. And here is the best part. We have a great deal for listeners of the Aaron Torres Pod. This is all you got to do. Go to BlueChew.com. You can try it for free when you use our code Torres at checkout. You just pay $5 for shipping. So go to BlueChew.com, promo code Torres, put in your order. You receive the first month free. All you got to do is pay $5 in shipping. Visit BlueChew.com for more details and important safety information. Thank you again to Blue Chew for being a partner and sponsor of the Aaron Torres Pod. With that said, it was a busy Saturday in college football. There is no more time to waste, so let's go ahead and get to the topic of the day. And the topic of the day, you don't need me to tell you, it came in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, with one of the craziest games that we have ever seen. As I said, drop your questions, drop your comments in. We will get to all of them, I promise. But we got to start with the unbelievable top 5 game in Tuscaloosa. And when I think about this game, listen, I think about it like everybody else does, right? Game opens, Alabama jumps out to a lead, then Alabama scores again, then Alabama scores again. And what was wild was we all kind of had the same takes. Middle of the first quarter, end of the first quarter, second quarter. It's like, oh my God, not only is the dynasty not dead, they might be better than ever. They're unbelievable. They are running Georgia out of the building. And we all had our takes and we all had our tweets and we were all sharing with friends and talking about whatever, doing whatever. And then all of a sudden halftime hits. Kalen Deboer maybe takes his foot off the gas a little bit. We're going to discuss that. Georgia cuts the lead. It was 28-0 at one point, 30-7 at the half, 33-15 late in the third going into the fourth. Then it's 33 to whatever. Then they score again. Then they score again. Then all of a sudden you look up and Georgia out of nowhere, they were trailing 28-0, 30-7 at the half. They're up 34-33 with about two and a half minutes to go. From there, Jalen Milroe gets the ball back, and we all know what happens from there. He throws it up. Ryan Williams, the unbelievable freshman, comes down with it. The spin, the twist, the break off, the separation. One play, 75-yard drive, 13 seconds. We haven't seen 13 seconds go by that quick since Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen in the NFL playoffs a few years ago. But Alabama gets the go-ahead score. Zabian Brown, obviously the true freshman defensive back, gets the interception to seal the victory. And Alabama wins a thriller 41-34. And so I want to go ahead and dive into this one from all angles. First of all, listen, the obvious stuff, it goes without saying, right? The stats are incredible. If you're not an Alabama fan, to see Alabama not miss a beat with Kalen Deboer taking over for Nick Saban, that's obviously terrifying. We shared the stat that he is now 109-12 as a head coach. He is now 6-0, by the way, against Kirby Smart, Steve Sarkisian, and Dan Lanning. But I think the other stat that kind of blew people away when they saw it, since the start of the 2021 season, Georgia has played 51 games. They are now 48-3 with all 3 losses to Alabama. They are 1-3 against Alabama during that stretch. Oh, by the way, 47-0 since the start of the 2021 season in games not featuring Alabama. So we're going to talk about Georgia in a second, but I want to start from the Bama side because when I actually look at this game, I think the win was more impressive than you think, and not just because it's Georgia, top 5 matchup, Kalen Deboer's first SEC game, whatever. It's more impressive because I think the more that I reflect back on the game, it was a more kind of convincing, if you will, Alabama win than maybe people are giving it credit for, right? I don't want to dismiss what Georgia did, coming all the way back from 28-0 down to take a 34-33 lead. But when I think about this game, I'm told it's this instant classic and it was maybe the 2 best teams in college football. I didn't see that, certainly from the Georgia perspective. We're going to discuss that in a minute. But instead, what I saw was a couple things that make me convinced that maybe this Bama win was a bit more impressive than a lot of people realize and a lot of people give credit for. First off, we know they were up 28-0. That's not a secret. We know they were up 30-7 at halftime, okay? Same time, what cannot be disputed, yes, Georgia deserves credit for the comeback, but for whatever reason, and maybe Kalen Deboer addressed it after the game, he did let his foot off the gas. Like other people will sit there and say, oh, no, it's not that, and da-da-da. No. He let his foot off the gas, okay? Alabama was up 30-7. I looked it up, okay? 2 of their first 3 possessions of the second half was run, pass, incompletion, punt. So that's not ideal. But again, it's a coach with at one point 28-0 lead, 37 lead, even at one point 33-15. And I think he's just trying to chew up the clock, get out of there. But they didn't take very much time off the clock, right? So I mean, you have a situation where I don't think that Georgia was all of a sudden fundamentally significantly better than Alabama in the second half of that game. What I do think is that you had a situation where Alabama, they just kept not being able to sustain drives. For fun, I looked it up. Even if you include the touchdown drive to end the game or to take the lead with whatever it was, a minute to go, Alabama only had one drive the entire second half that took up more than about 2 minutes and 40 seconds. So, yes, Georgia made the comeback, but Alabama, I don't want to say they made it easy on them, but Alabama could not sustain drives in the second half, and I thought the play calling got conservative. I'm not blaming Kalen Deboer. I'm just saying that's a fact. To the other thing, like I saw all this, oh my God, Carson Beck, this, that, Georgia's amazing. Again, we'll talk about Georgia here momentarily. But here's the other reality of that game, is that part of the reason that Georgia was able to make a comeback, they were basically in a 2-minute offense, and they were basically, oh, by the way, on top of it in 4-down territory the entire second half of the game, okay? 5 fourth-down attempts, 5 fourth-down conversions. They basically started going for 2-point conversions after scores every single score of the second half. And so I just bring it up because, yeah, there were 2 different competing things that led to 2 different results. And then on top of that, what do you have? One team that scored quickly in the first half in Alabama and then can't sustain drives in the second half. The defense was worn out by the end of the game. So I don't know if this sounds like I'm making excuses for Bama. I just think the win, because Georgia rallied back, I think people are underselling that this was kind of more one-sided than I think a lot of people realize. I don't think Georgia played a great game. I don't think Bama played a great game either, but don't think we should diminish what Bama did getting the victory at home. And so when I look at Bama, let me say this. Big picture, I think if you're a Bama fan, you have to be as excited as you possibly could be at this point in the season. Yeah, you don't want to blow a lead. We get that. But at the same time, I was thinking about this, right? Is you're coming off a year where you win the SEC championship. You have the coaching change. We've talked about it a million times. But here's my question, is that first off, on Sunday, they officially ascended to number 1 in the AP poll. Congrats to them. I know it doesn't matter if you're number 1 on September 29th versus January 29th, a couple of days after that national championship game, but it does matter. But what it also says to me, every goal that you would have had if Nick Saban was still your head coach is very much in play for Kalen Deboer, right? Because I think coming into the season, and Bama fans, maybe you'll disagree, whatever. If you do, that's fine. I'm not going to argue with you. But I think there was a lot of thought of, well, it's year 1, and, if we don't make an SEC championship game, it's a 12-team playoff. Let's just get in the field. If we don't win it now, all of a sudden, tell me why Alabama can't be in Atlanta. Tell me why they can't be competing for an SEC title, why they can't compete for that probably the number 1 or number 2 overall seed in the 12-team playoff, a first-round bye, and competing as a true national champion. Because when I look at this team, a couple things. One, I think they're further along than we all thought they would be. You can argue, you could debate, but here's the bottom line. Jalen Milroe looks really freaking good, okay? 393 yards passing, I think, was the final stat total from Saturday night. Let me make sure I have that correctly. 374 yards, so I apologize. So basically a 300-yard passing game, plus, of course, that deep pass to Ryan Williams to end the game. But Jalen Milroe is improved. This is a guy that through 4 games is completing 73% of his passes, 10 touchdowns, 1 interception. He is better. Obviously, he has a difference maker in Ryan Williams at wide receiver. Unbelievable what Ryan Williams is doing. And what's crazy is how clutch this kid is. I did a reaction on Sunday night, but remember, the South Florida game, first of all, 2 touchdowns in his debut against Western Kentucky. The South Florida game, it was 21-16 in the fourth quarter. And Ryan Williams, yes, we know he's 17. He was the kid who made the play that really broke open the South Florida game. Had a great game against Wisconsin, deep touchdown pass, and he is the guy that makes the play in this game. So you have wide receiver 1. You have 2 great running backs in Jam Miller and Justice Haynes, and then the defense looks as good as you could have asked for. And so I know Georgia put up a lot of points and a lot of yards, but again, it was 2-minute offense. It was 4-down territory the entire second half. You're worn down by the end. I think this Alabama team has all the pieces needed to make a deep run in January. We always say that in March, right? Can they make a deep run in March? I think Alabama can do whatever they want in that 12-team playoff. I'd also add this. Just look at the schedule. Like I said, I think there's a lot of reason if you're excited to be a Bama fan. One, not just because you're 4-0, but two, look at how everything else is breaking out, right? We all think, and let's just work under the scenario that, maybe you don't win the SEC, maybe you don't get that number 1, number 2 overall seed, okay? Well, here's the bottom line. You're 4-0. You have a win over Georgia. So even if you get tripped up here, there, whatever, that win is going to carry weight, even if I think Georgia's maybe not quite as good as people think. But same time, you have a win that's going to carry weight. If you're 10-2 at the end of the year, if Georgia's 10-2 at the end of the year, guess what? First of all, you get to go to Atlanta. That's one. And then two, in the playoff committee's eyes, you are going to be perceived, as above Georgia because you beat them head to head. And beyond that, when I look at Alabama, here's what would have me excited if I was a Bama fan. Look at the schedule. This schedule that we thought was so daunting and so impossible back in June, July, August, it don't look so tough anymore, okay? You survived Georgia. This week you got Vandy. I know Vandy's improved. That's a win, right? We have to assume it's a win. South Carolina is improved, but they're coming to Bryant-Denny Stadium. I would expect a win there. And I will say, Tennessee does look like the one game. It's like, oh, Tennessee is really good. Now, Alabama's not used to losing to them. I know Alabama lost the last time they played in Knoxville. But Tennessee, to me, is as good as any team in college football this season that I have seen so far. But you get Missouri at home. All of a sudden, those road trips to LSU. I'm sorry, LSU does not look good to me. LSU looks very pedestrian. They look very beatable. We're seeing the impact that Jaden Daniels is having in the NFL and maybe the underrated impact he had at LSU last year, not to mention Malik Neighbors. And, oh, by the way, Oklahoma late in the year doesn't look as tough either because Oklahoma doesn't have a quarterback. Their O-line's beat up. Won't even talk about Auburn the final week of the season. Sorry, producer Matt, it's the truth. Going to stay away from Auburn. I bring it up because if you're an Alabama fan, you have to be excited. A season where I don't want to put a floor or a ceiling on what you thought, but now all of a sudden this looks like an 11-1 type team. This looks like a team that can absolutely be in Atlanta. It looks like a team that can compete with anybody, and it looks like a team that could be a threat if and when they potentially make that 12-team playoff. Go ahead, drop in your questions and comments, your thoughts on Bama, but credit Bama for getting the win. Do want to switch gears, though, and I do want to talk a little bit about Georgia, okay? Because as I said to lead the show, I think there's this narrative of, oh, Georgia's got a Bama problem, and Kirby can't figure out Bama. First of all, I'll defend Georgia. Not a lot of people have Bama figured out over the last couple of years, okay? And so we said the stat earlier, but in Georgia's last 51 games, they're 48-3, but only 1-3 against Bama, so they're 47-0 against everybody else. And I think everybody's focused on the Bama stat, whatever. But to me, this Georgia team has bigger issues, bigger problems, not, again, I hate to be a jerk, but not Oklahoma problems, not Auburn problems, not Arkansas problems. But this was a team that was number 1 in the country to start the season. And I haven't really seen it. And so to me, when I look at Georgia, it's what I say on this show all the time. I think two things can be true. I think we absolutely, positively should give Georgia credit for the rally, for the comeback, for being in position to win the game down 28-0 and 30-7 at the half. But we are now a third of the way through the season for Georgia. And I think there are some big picture issues for this team. So let's go ahead and dive into the Georgia perspective. And again, I don't want to dismiss what Georgia did in coming back. They were down 28-0. They were down 30-7 at the half. There are a lot of teams that, frankly, either would have quit or, bottom line, just aren't good enough to make a comeback. Georgia was able to put up that slew of points, middle of the third quarter on, into the fourth quarter, take that 34-33 lead, okay? So I don't want to dismiss them because there's a lot of teams that would have quit. And there's a lot of teams that just frankly would not have been good enough to make up that deficit. And to Georgia's credit, they did. So I don't want to undersell it. I don't want to underappreciate what they've done. And I don't want to make it sound like this is a negative, Georgia's the worst program that's ever walked the face of the earth thing. But at the same time, what I will say, I saw what I believe to be a little bit of a revisionist history after this game. Like after this, it was a great game. But let's not pretend that Georgia played a great game. They played about a great, probably if there's 30 minutes in a half, they probably played a great 18 minutes, 20 minutes. And so I saw this like, well, Bama should be number 1. And how can you not have Georgia too? And it's like, Did I watch the same game that everybody else did? Because I want to give Georgia credit for the comeback, but there also are problems that seemingly are continuing to emerge that we got to talk about, okay? So first off, let me say this. Carson Beck, for whatever reason, is regressing, okay? Not a knock on him as a person, as a character, as a leader, as a whatever. And I'm not smart enough to know why. Is it the Brock Bowers thing, not having Brock Bowers, whatever? But he's regressed. As a matter of fact, it was funny because, I got old takes exposed on Saturday night because I put out a tweet middle of the second quarter when he was awful. And I said, this is the part where Carson Beck should be thankful that Dylan Raiola decommitted, because this is probably the spot where Carson Beck gets benched and he might lose his spot going forward. So, of course, old takes exposed when Georgia took the lead, retweeted that tweet. I take back nothing. I don't apologize for anything I said. This guy has regressed, okay? This was a guy, and by the way, it's not just my opinion, but a fact. First of all, Saturday night, great final stat line, great yardage line. He wasn't great, though. 27 of 50 passing, that's 54%. 3 touchdowns, but 3 interceptions. But take my opinion about Carson Beck out of it, okay? Take my opinion about Carson Beck out of it, and let's just look at the facts. The facts of the matter are that this season, last year, he completed 72% of his passes. This year, through a third of the season, he's completing 62%. He has 3 interceptions after having 6 all of last year. This guy is not as good. Not saying he can't get there, not saying he's terrible, not saying he's this, not saying he's that. I'm just saying right now he ain't the dude that he was a year ago. Also worth noting, the run game. Now, I know part of it, they faced really good defenses in Kentucky. They faced really good defense in Clemson. They faced really good defense in Bama. And again, they fell behind against Bama. So it was one of those where they had to throw the football. Same time, let's not ignore the facts here. And here are the facts. Last year, they were a top 25 run offense. This year, they're ranked 102nd nationally. 80 yards rushing against Bama. 102 yards against Kentucky. I don't think that's going to get it done as the season goes on. And oh, by the way, the run defense, they can't stop the run. Again, maybe part of it was Jalen Milroe is awesome, but 173 yards against Bama, 170 yards against Kentucky. And let's have an honest conversation about Georgia. Get in the comments. Tell me if you disagree. Look at Georgia. They've played 4 games. Let's take out the Tennessee Tech game. Okay, Tennessee Tech doesn't count. Not a real team as far as I'm concerned. They played a good half against Clemson, but the first half, Clemson was every bit their equal. And then on top of that, against Kentucky, they could have and maybe should have lost. And so you look at the Bama game, they got blown out the first half. I mean, we're talking about a team that through a quarter of their season has probably basically played one good stretch against Clemson, one good stretch against Alabama. Other than that, they haven't come close to reaching their potential. And so you see the schedule on the screen right now. Look at the schedule. Now, I will say you get about as soft of a landing these next couple weeks. Auburn at home, Mississippi State at home, okay. But then mid-October, you go to Texas. Texas is a better team right now. And I could not believe when I saw people on Saturday night, well, Alabama's number 1 and Georgia's number 2. It's like, did we watch the same game? Are we watching the same sport? Stop looking at a box score and pay attention to the game. You got at Texas. You got Florida after the bye. Florida stinks, okay. But then you have at Ole Miss and Tennessee back-to-back. I know Ole Miss lost. We're going to talk about that game in a minute as far as what does it mean from the Kentucky perspective. But Ole Miss can still put up points. Ole Miss, I think, just played their worst game of the season in part because they hadn't been tested yet. And then Tennessee might be one of the 2 or 3 best teams in the country, probably is one of the 2 or 3 best teams in the country. And so I just bring it up because maybe Georgia just needed to get this loss out of the way. Maybe they're going to get right. But this is not, to me, like an upper level team right now. And I think if you're Georgia, you got to be careful. Like we talked about the schedule in the preseason, and I think guys like me dismissed it. Oh, it's Georgia. They'll figure out a way. All of a sudden, Tennessee looks better than we thought. All of a sudden, Texas might be the best team in the country. Tennessee might be the best team in the country for all we know. Ole Miss, even though they lost, I don't think is like the 11th best team in the SEC. I think they're like the 5th or 6th best team in the SEC that had a bad Saturday against Kentucky in an SEC opener when it was Kentucky's 3rd game. And so to me, if you're looking for some saving graces for Georgia, it's obviously one that, everybody Everybody's got a tough schedule in the SEC. You have time to get right. And maybe, by the way, the schedule has just been tougher. Clemson has looked awesome since the second half of that Georgia game. Kentucky maybe is better than we thought they were, is almost certainly better than we thought they were, and you survived that game. But I look at this Georgia team. The other saving grace, by the way, is we're in a 12-team playoff era. This is like the NFL. You don't have to be perfect in week 1, week 2, week 3, or September, but get better as the season goes on. But I bring it up because I keep hearing this like, oh, Georgia's as good as anybody. Are they? They're better than Texas with Quinn Ewers? They're better than Tennessee right now? I'm sorry, I don't see it. Don't want to dismiss Georgia. I'm not saying they can't make the playoff. I'm not even saying they can't make it to the SEC championship game and win it. But this notion right now that they're right on the cusp, they're nowhere close. I think Kirby Smart has a lot of things to figure out. All right, so what we're going to do, we're going to take a quick break, come back. When we come back, we will talk about some of the other big games and do want to get to some of your comments. The chat is humming. Appreciate everybody's support. We'll come back. We'll talk Kentucky, the stunner against Ole Miss. What does it mean? Quick break. Be right back. But before we do, many of you ask me all the time, Torres, what can I do to help support the show? You give me hours and hours and hours of content every single week. What can I do to help you? Well, I'll tell you what, do me a quick favor. Check out the Aaron Torres Media merchandise store for all of your team-specific shirts, hats, and more, all available at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. A lot of you wondering, Torres, what can I get in that merch store? Well, first of all, we got our brand new Hope and Pope Kentucky basketball t-shirts. That's right. Mark Pope has arrived. He is here to save the day. Get your Hope and Pope t-shirts there. Also, Arkansas fans, the Big Pig Invasion is here. You can get your tees there. Basketball School Alabama shirts. Mora Hurley 2024 UConn shirts for your tailgates at Rentschler Field, your games at the XL Center or Gamble. And oh, by the way, your Mike effing Woodson gear for Indiana. If you love football, we got you covered too. We got more Dion shirts and hats than we even know what to do with. The freeze warning has hit the plains. Auburn fans, grab your freeze warning tees now. And of course, our new era, new rules shirt applies to Nebraska football and its incredible fan base. We have more coming for the fall, plenty in stock right now. So make sure to check out the Aaron Torres Media merch store at aarontorresonline.com/merchandise. And you can always hit me up with any questions. Aaron Torres Podcast Questions @gmail.com. All right, everybody. I'm back. Good to be back. So first off, the chat is humming. Appreciate everybody's support. Drop your comments. Drop your thoughts. I promise we will get to them in just one moment. Before we get to it, though, we have to talk about a man that has been very much maligned on this show, who very much deserves to take a victory lap, and Torres got to take the L here on a Sunday in September. That is Mark Stoops and the Kentucky Wildcats. By the way, we did an immediate reaction to this after the game on Saturday, but I want to dive in deeper because this was just unbelievable, and Mark Stoops deserves so much credit, okay? So let's start. We know the deal. Kentucky, a 17.5-point underdog coming into this game. Now, I did think it could potentially be competitive. Mark Stoops, always to his credit, puts together a game plan to kind of keep things close, keep things low scoring on the road. It was Ole Miss's SEC opener. It was, of course, Kentucky's third SEC game. So I thought things could be close. Did not think we would see what we did as Kentucky pulls off the 20-17 shocker. Okay. Now we're going to get into the big play. Mark Stoops, Mr. Big, you know what, Mr. Big Cojones. That's how we say it in Spanish. Okay. But before we get to it, let me even start by saying what I just said a second ago, which is the game plan was actually awesome. Okay. And like, everyone's going to talk about the punt, the non-punt, I should say, and they should. But at the same time, the game plan was perfect because Ole Miss opening drive comes down, moves the football, scores. But I would argue after the first possession, after those scripted plays, Lane Kiffin, that call sheet that he has, after that, Kentucky dominated this game. And Kentucky, more importantly, controlled the tempo, dictated how the game was played. And that was how you get into a situation where they were late in the game. Loved the first half. Loved, you know what I really actually loved? For people who watch this game closely, it was certainly the best game of the early window. But what I loved was you think to keep things low scoring, to control the football, it's just run, 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 run. And it is. But what I loved was it was running with Brock Vandagriff. It was running with the backup quarterback, Gavin Wimsatt. It was just enough passing to keep things honest. And it's crazy because Kentucky has two great wide receivers in Dane Key and Barian Brown, who obviously made their presence felt later in the game. And so Mark Stoops in Kentucky controlled things early. It's 10-7 going into the half. But then all of a sudden, we know how it was as Kentucky, of course, going into that final drive, going into the fourth quarter, actually was trailing 17-14 going into that final drive. So we get down, Kentucky, it's third down from their own 20. And let me even back up because this is the crazy part. Kentucky fans, I hope you're enjoying every second of this. You should. 2 weeks ago, we know I crushed Mark Stoops. I thought it was the wrong decision to punt in that situation. It was 4th and 8. It was their own 48. I know there was a penalty, whatever, but thought it was a terrible decision. This was the one where I thought you got to punt it, right? And not only did I think you had to punt it, what was crazy was if you were watching the game, Sean McDonough and Greg McElroy, when Mark Stoops lined up, and there was no hesitation in my man, okay? There was no hesitation in Mark Stoops. I think even McElroy and McDonough were kind of like, is he just doing this to try to get them off sides? What is he trying to do? I don't really get it. Whatever. Of course, getting them off sides didn't make sense because it was 4th and 7. But 4th and 7 at Kentucky's own 20. What do? He calls it up. He's a regular riverboat Mark Stoops here. As on 4th and 20, Brock Vandagriff completes a 63-yard pass to Barian Brown. Puts him in the red zone. Of course, a few plays later, there's the weird play where there's the fumble, the recovery. Kentucky takes the lead, and Kentucky gets the victory thanks to Mark Stoops' aggressiveness. And again, credit where it's due. Even Lane Kiffin said after the game, Lane Kiffin was like, man, I don't know if Mark has ever done that, but he was aggressive. He was fearless. They deserve to win. And so Kentucky gets the victory. And so when I look at this Kentucky victory, a couple things come to mind. First of all, let's give the man his flowers, right? And one thing about me is I think anybody who's listened to this show, I can be very critical. I don't ever try to be critical for the sake of being mean. I don't ever try to be critical just for trying to be sarcastic or funny or ironic or this or that. Like when I call somebody out, it's because I think they screwed up. And by the way, I get called out every day. Mark Stoops can call me out. I've had coaches tell me what I said on my show is wrong. So it's not like I'm perfect. But I never try to be mean-spirited about it. But I felt like Mark Stoops deserved the criticism that he got 2, 3, 4 weeks ago. So I'm also happy to be wrong on this one and happy that he had that moment. Because one, you could tell how big of a deal it was, okay? Did not hesitate, did not think twice about not punting the football. But then also we saw the videos after the game where he's crowd surfing in the locker room and he's celebrating and he's happy. And you could tell that weight was off his shoulders because Kentucky fans, what was the stat? I think it was 1-34 in their last 35 games against top 10 teams or whatever it was. Stoops has always won. And we talked about this after the South Carolina loss. He's won all the games he's supposed to, but rarely the ones that he's not supposed to. And what's been frustrating for Kentucky fans is I think probably about the last year and a half or so, they haven't won the games they're supposed to. Lost to Vandy at home 2 years ago. Lost to South Carolina now 3 straight years. And so he needed this win. He gets this win. You could see this relief. By the way, I saw a video of him walking into the press conference. Somebody says to him, nobody's saying you're not aggressive now. And he kind of smiles and said, I probably should have gone for it last time. Listen, I feel like Mark Stoops. I feel like this is a whole new man. I feel like Mark Stoops is now, he's going to get the red convertible. He's going to put the top down. He's going to have the time of his life. I mean, I feel like he feels like he's 20 years younger than he was. He's never going to punt ever again. But he deserves credit. I'm happy for him. I'm happy he had his moment because the bottom line is he is a great coach. And he is a great coach that has done great things at Kentucky, but it doesn't mean he was immune to criticism a few weeks ago. But if guys like me are going to criticize him, then we have to give him his flowers on the day like today. And he deserves those flowers on this Sunday or Monday or Tuesday or whenever you're listening. Beyond that, let me take it a step further. It is crazy to me how quickly things change in college football in terms of perception and narrative, okay? Because remember, we talked about this after the South Carolina game. Kentucky gets smoked by South Carolina. And after that game, you look at the schedule and you kind of sat there and said, like, Kentucky's 1-1. They got a lot of tough games. SEC, Georgia, Ole Miss, Tennessee, Texas. There might not be like 4 wins on this schedule. So they lose to Georgia in a game that they were obviously very competitive. They beat last week Ohio, 2-2 coming into this one. Now you beat Ole Miss. Everything looks different, right? Kentucky fans, I mean, all of a sudden the air smells crisper, flowers smell better, the sun is brighter. But in all seriousness, you're now all of a sudden looking at a very nice spot in your schedule. First off, you do get a bye this week, a much-needed bye, a much-deserved bye, 3 SEC games before the end of September. But 2, beyond that, look at the schedule coming out. 2 weeks from now, you have Vanderbilt at home. I know Vanderbilt's better, but that's a game you should get. By the way, Vanderbilt will be coming off of a game against Alabama this coming weekend. So there's the old body blow theory. When teams used to play Alabama, the next week they were always a little slow, a little bit beat up. We'll see if that's the case, but that should be a win. You go to Florida. Sounds like a tough game in theory, except Kentucky's won 3 straight against Florida. Kentucky's won 2 of their last 3 in the Swamp. I'm still not sold that if Billy Napier loses to UCF this weekend, that Billy Napier is coaching that game. So you have Florida in a couple weeks. Then you get Auburn at home. Poor producer Matt's been taking nothing but strays here all day, but Auburn's not very good right now. So a team that at one point was 1-2 with losses to South Carolina and Georgia, you're having trouble finding wins on the schedule. If they do what they're supposed to do, they can be 6-3 going into the final, whatever it is, 6-2, going into the final, whatever it is, week of the season. Now you do have at Tennessee. You do have at Texas. I'm not going to sugarcoat it and sweet coat it and say, oh, but I mean, you just won at Ole Miss. So it's not like, I don't think you're going to beat Tennessee. I don't think you're going to beat Texas, but you just beat Ole Miss. I can't say that it can't happen. And I think we've learned with the Georgia game, with this game, they got dudes up front that can play with and compete with anybody, especially on the defense. Lane Kiffin talked about it after the game. He talked about it before the game. So all of a sudden now, got a couple, a manageable 3-game stretch. Louisville, I am not sold on the back half of the final game of the season. Oh, by the way, you've always had success against Louisville. You get Murray State at home. Again, I'm not going to oversell how tough at Tennessee is, especially with your history against Tennessee. I'm not going to sell how tough Texas is going to be in November. But I also think all of a sudden, this was a team we were talking about, like, are they a 3-9 kind of team? I think they could be 8-4, which sounds crazy because they were 1-2 just a few weeks ago. But credit Mark Stoops. He deserved this moment. He gets this win. We saw the crowd surfing in the locker room. We saw the post-game stuff. He deserves every second of it. Again, go ahead, drop your questions in. We're going to get to them in a minute, and we're going to get to the rest of college football in a minute. Before we do, though, do want to welcome back one of our new partners. We are so excited to be working with them. We absolutely love them. I am, of course, talking about Collie Puffs. Oh, by the way, look what I got right here. Look what I got right here. I got me some Collie Puffs, okay? So first of all, this is the honey barbecue flavor right here. We got some white cheddar right here, okay? So I'm going to eat a lot of these after I get off the air. But here's the deal. Some of you are probably sitting there wondering, what are Collie Puffs? What are they, Torres? Tell me about them. I should be listening to your show. You've talked about them, but I wasn't paying attention. What are they? Well, the bottom line is it's football season. You're on the couch. Spent all day Saturday watching college football on the couch. Spent all day Sunday watching the NFL. Monday night football, Thursday night football, and you're like, dude, I got to be careful. I can't be eating too much. I'm a big fat slob. Well, here is why Collie Puffs comes into play. They are a healthy yet delicious alternative to the snacks and unhealthy foods in your snack aisle, right? You go to the grocery store, your kids go to the grocery store. You want to run for those Doritos, those Fritos, those whatever, do Collie Puffs instead, okay? Collie Puffs, baked, not fried, healthy ingredients. By the way, they are very affordable. They are on shelves not far from where I live, and they are very affordable. But here's the other thing. They are absolutely delicious. So not as many calories, not as many salts, whatever it is. But at the same time, they taste good. Again, they're founded by a family-owned company not far from where I live. Joey, by the way, who founded it, huge football fan, Raider season tickets, Rams season tickets. He's a West Coast guy. But I just bring it up because he's just like you. He was trying to figure out an alternative, what tastes good, what will my kids eat, but what am I going to enjoy eating myself? So for more information, visit Caulipuffs.com. That's CAULIPUFS.com. You can also get them on Amazon. Amazon, you're searching for whatever you're searching for. Search for Collie Puffs. You can throw them in your cart. Try them. You'll like them. You'll appreciate it. Tell them Torres sent you. Appreciate Collie Puffs again. And I'm telling you, these guys, they are delicious. So thank you to Collie Puffs. I'm looking at them now. They're really good. They're really, really, really good. All right, let's start to wrap the show, okay? And I want to get to a few more topics before we get out of here. And where I want to start right now, I want to start with that man right there, Coach Prime and the Colorado Buffaloes, okay? And it's funny, another game that we did a quick reaction to, but I want to dive in deeper. But this one had big vibes of Kentucky Ole Miss from this perspective. Colorado came in at one point last week, they were a 15.5-point underdog. As you can see on the screen, they closed at a 12.5-point underdog, but they were close to a 2-touchdown underdog, depending on where you got the game, okay? And if you watch the game, it was no different than Kentucky. Colorado scores early, then UCF scores, and then the rest of the game, Colorado absolutely dominated the UCF Golden Knights. UCF came into the game 3-0. UCF came into the game, the number one rush offense in the country, and Colorado absolutely shuts them down. Colorado throws the ball all over the field. The run game is great. And here is my question for you, because I know people are going to get mad, Torres. You never say anything but positives about Coach Prime in Colorado. Well, one, if you cannot see that this team is much improved, I can't help you. I can't help you. I'm sorry. But two, here is the bigger thing. If you look at the Big 12, we are not to October 1st yet. There are 2 undefeated teams in the Big 12 right now. Iowa State and BYU, credit to both of them. But there are 2 undefeated teams. Everybody else has at least 1 loss. And my simple question for you is this. Why can't Colorado, in a wide open league, be a Big 12 title contender? It might sound crazy, but it isn't if you just watch the games and you just pay attention. So first of all, let's talk about this game. Bottom line, I said it in the instant reaction, but I want to dive in deeper. Colorado's most complete effort of the Coach Prime era. Last year, they won games. They had to score 1 million points. I thought the Colorado State game 2 weeks ago was probably the most complete effort until this point, but this was even better. Okay, so first of all, we'll get to Shador in a second. We'll get to Travis Hunter, who, if he isn't your Heisman Trophy winner or Heisman Trophy favorite right now heading into October, you don't know what you're watching. But let's talk about everything else. Because first off, the haters, the casuals, what were they saying 2-3 weeks ago? Oh, it's a great quarterback, a great skill position guy, and nothing else. Well, guess what happened on Saturday, okay? Guess what happened on Saturday? First off, Colorado, second time in 3 weeks, they hit the 100-yard rushing mark. Saturday, 128 yards rushing, 4.5 yards per carry. The O-line's coming together. It's not a finished product, but I go back to week 1. I think about North Dakota State. There was that big play at midfield. They couldn't get the 1 yard they needed to get a first down in the first half of the first game. Well, they're moving people up front, okay? Like I said, 128 yards rushing, 4.5 yards per carry. The O-line is finally starting to figure it out, and that is big. We know what that does for a passing game. Also worth noting, the defense is getting after dudes. And listen, Torres gets a lot of stuff wrong, so I got to take L's left and right. Torres takes L's left and right. No doubt about it. But at the same time, this defense, the one thing I said, if you pay attention to the portal stuff, they got a lot of dudes coming in that are playmakers. BJ Green was all Pac-12 at Arizona State last year. Sam Okunlola, who actually Coach Prime said hasn't been playing his best football, was one of Pitt's best defensive players last year. By the way, Deion Hayes, who's been playing phenomenally, was one of Pitt's best defensive players last year. So they had guys coming in. They had a couple nice pieces, Levante Bentley, etc. And I'm telling you, man, this defense is getting after people. First off, here are the stats. This is incredible. Not incredible, but very good. 13 TFLs in this game, 5 sacks. They are blowing things up in the backfield and making plays on the defensive side of the football, okay? So credit where it's due. Oh, by the way, as you can see on the bottom of the screen, listen, Producer Matt, thank you. I didn't even tell Producer Matt this. If you're watching on YouTube, UCF came into the game averaging 375 yards rushing per game. that was tops in college football. I don't care who you play. When you're averaging close to 400 yards rushing, you're doing something right. Colorado gave up 177 yards rushing. Basically, what is that? That's essentially half of what they were averaging coming in. Dominated the game, forced fumble recovery late. Defense is awesome. And then the pass game, it goes without saying. There's nothing else for me to add. Hyperbole, we're past the hyperbolic stuff at this point. Travis Hunter is the best player in college football. Travis Hunter is unbelievable. How about this? Travis Hunter, worst game of his career, or worst game of his season, I should say, at wide receiver, only had 9 catches for 89 yards. Bummer. What a scrub. Yeah, I'm being sarcastic. He's awesome. Okay, that's his worst game at wide receiver. Still got a touchdown and had an interception in this game. And listen, I don't want to I don't want to oversell the Heisman stuff in whatever it is, September 29th, but he's doing stuff that we have never seen before. I went back and we talked about Charles Woodson last week. Charles Woodson had like 14 catches the year he won the Heisman. Deserved it. Not underselling what he did. But Travis Hunter had 9 catches. That was his worst game the other day. Had 11 catches a few weeks ago against Colorado State. Shedeur, I believe he's the best quarterback in college football. I tweeted it out. By the way, shout out Deion Sanders Jr., who gave me a retweet on Saturday night. I think Shedeur is the most talented quarterback in college football. And you look at what he can do, the pinpoint accuracy, the deep ball, the short passes, the comeback routes. I'm not a QB expert, but the gifts he has are second to none. And everyone says, oh, who has Colorado played? Well, give me the opposite. Give Shedeur the same that whatever Quinn Ewers has, Carson Beck has, Jalen Milroe has. Dude, it's going to be whatever. Give him the same O-line, whatever. But the bottom line is this kid is as good as anybody. And that receiver core, and I thought Brock Huer did a good job of talking about this on the broadcast. That receiver core is better than people realize. Like, everybody talks about Ohio State, Texas, whatever. LeJontay Wester was a 1,000-yard receiver a year ago at FAU. Jimmy Horn can break plays on any given play. Will Shepard, by the way, was Vandy's leading receiver, like 67, 68 catches in the SEC last year. They got guys everywhere. And Shedeur is getting the ball out and everything. And so I'm so excited about this team. And I'm just going to say it. I think they're a Big 12 title contender. Now, in part, because everybody's a Big 12 title contender at this point. We're through September. There's 16 teams in the league. Now, there are 4 0-2 teams, Oklahoma State, Baylor, Houston, and Kansas. There's 3 2-0 teams in the league, BYU, Colorado, and Texas Tech. But I just bring it up because if you look at this schedule, tell me the games that are impossible. Everybody has problems and issues in this league, okay? So you're 4-1 right now. You're 2-0 in the Big 12. You get a bye. You play Kansas State at home in a couple weeks, okay? Everyone's going to tell you how great Kansas State is. Oh, Kansas State got right against Oklahoma State on Saturday. Kansas State is also 1-1 and should be 0-2 on the road. They got embarrassed by BYU a few weeks ago. They should have lost to Tulane a few weeks before that. That is a game Colorado can win. I don't know if they'll be favored. I don't really care. They weren't really favored against UCF. Arizona, to their credit, looked much better on Saturday against Utah. They pulled off the upset, but let's see if they can keep that consistent. That's 3 weeks from now. And then, oh, by the way, on top of that, you have Cincinnati, you have Texas Tech. Texas Tech is actually playing really good football right now, but I don't know that I'm sold that Texas Tech can keep it up. Utah, I think, is the big one, right? Utah is a situation where you're going on the road, or you get Utah in a game where what I think is interesting about Utah right now, we're just trying to figure out what's Cam Rising's deal. You do get Utah at home. Forgive me. I think I just said they're on the road, but look at Utah. Without Cam Rising, they haven't been that great. Now, they bullied Oklahoma State a few weeks ago, but on Saturday, they couldn't do anything against Arizona. And if you can get up on them, like you know that Colorado is capable of, they're beatable. So we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens with Cam Rising. Kansas, and then Oklahoma State. Neither of those teams is playing very good football right now. And so I look at this Colorado team. I'm here to tell you, if you don't believe yet, you better start believing. Because when I see this team, when I see this schedule, this is a wide open league. Utah, who I thought was unbeatable coming into yesterday, loses to Arizona. Arizona, who I thought was terrible, looks awesome. But Kansas State at home isn't unbeatable. By the way, you could argue the 3 toughest games left on the schedule are all at home. Kansas State at home, Oklahoma State at home, and Utah at home. Now, again, we'll see with Arizona. Arizona looked better, and Texas Tech is a very tough place to play. But I am here to tell you, if you don't think this team can mess around and win the Big 12, I don't know what to tell you. Really do appreciate your support because if you do not believe in this team, like I said, don't know what to tell you. Don't know why it says appreciate your support. I think I'm still thinking about Collie Puffs, but Colorado's the real deal. And I think they can mess around and win the Big 12, a much-deserved bye. They host Kansas State in just a couple days. Really quickly, let's just rip through a couple other very quick stories. I don't want to spend a ton of time on anything else. First off, I think the Big 10, it's interesting. The SEC, and this has been a historic thing, the SEC schedules a lot of big games early. We've already had, obviously, Oklahoma-Auburn. We've already had Oklahoma-Tennessee. We've already had Alabama-Georgia. The Big 10, I think we're just now starting to figure things out, okay? Thought it was interesting. Basically, I think, let me put it this way. I think we all thought coming in some order, the top 5 teams, these were the 5 teams that were ranked coming into the year, were Ohio State, Oregon, Michigan, Penn State, USC. Well, all 5 of them played league games this weekend. A couple of them played their first league games. Penn State played its first league game. Oregon played its first league game. Ohio State played its first league game. Of course, Michigan and USC played a week ago. In terms of what we saw, listen, credit where it's due. Ohio State looked absolutely awesome. Ohio State dominated Michigan State on the road. Final score, 38-7. It was 24-0 at the half. Listen, I've been critical of Ryan Day. I've been critical of Ohio State. Got to give them credit. They haven't played the best competition, but they have been dominant. That Chip Kelly run offense has been as good as advertised, and that looks like a team that is as good as advertised. We knew they were a $20 million payroll coming into the year, but we got to give them credit. They have looked good so far. Ryan Day and Chip Kelly are figuring out a way to use all those pieces. Ohio State improves to 4-0. Their next big one, this coming weekend, they host Iowa, which I think could be a tougher game. But 2 weeks from now, they go to Oregon, October 12th. Circle your calendars. Oregon, by the way, goes to the Rose Bowl, not far from where I am. The game was on while I was doing Fox Sports Radio. Oregon dominates against UCLA. I don't think UCLA is very good, but credit Oregon. They just went in from start to finish. It was never close. It was never competitive. They win by 21 points, 34-13. 431 yards of total offense. They hold UCLA to under 200 yards of total offense. Poor Eric Bieniemy. That guy's never getting an NFL head coaching job the way things are going. But Oregon dominates this game. By the way, again, Oregon and Ohio State in 2 weeks. By the way, you know who else plays in 2 weeks? Penn State at USC. Penn State at home, whiteout game. They take care of business. They do beat Illinois. The final score in the Penn State-Illinois game was 21-7. Listen, didn't have Penn State in my preseason playoff. For like 5 straight off seasons, I've been told this is the year the offense is going to be different. Yet in every big game, the offense is slow. The offense struggles. The offense doesn't do what is expected. So we'll see, because I do think in a few weeks, listen, you can criticize Lincoln Riley. Teams get pushed around sometimes, whatever. But first off, USC themselves is coming off a nice win against Wisconsin, trailed at the half, goes on a 28-0 run in the second half to get the victory. But USC is going to be able to put up points. And Penn State, I don't care how good your defense is. If you think you're winning that game 13-3 or 21-7 or 21, it's not happening. And so Penn State, to me, I don't credit. You beat Illinois at home. Big freaking deal. No disrespect to Illinois, but you were 17.5-point favorite. It was close the entire game. So I'm just not sold. The good thing about the Big Ten, as I said, we are going to start to get some answers soon. 2 weeks from this weekend, so really 2 Saturdays from now, Ohio State at Oregon, Penn State at USC. Also worth noting, also in October, Oregon will also, on top of the Ohio State game, actually, I take that back. First week of November, they travel to Michigan. Penn State, the first week of October, travels to Ohio State. So basically, credit the Big Ten. They kind of spread out those big games. But I just bring it up because, I think we're going to learn a lot more about this league and a lot more about the teams in it. By the way, while we're on the Big Ten, just want to take a half a second. We talked about them a few weeks ago. Credit where it's due to the Indiana Hoosiers. Indiana 5-0 for the first time since 1967. Curt Cignetti is the head coach. Curt Cignetti, of course, came from James Madison. They call him Coach Sig. I love every second of it. By the way, Indiana actually ranked in the new AP poll. I believe they absolutely deserve it. They're 5-0, and here's the crazy part. You look at the schedule, they go to Northwestern next week. You'd think that would be 6-0. Then all of a sudden, a very intriguing game against Nebraska on October 19th. So you could see a scenario where they are entering the middle of November undefeated. Here are the next 4 games. Indiana is 5-0 right now. At Northwestern, Nebraska at home, Washington home, at Michigan State. Do I think Indiana is going to be 9-0 heading into the final 3? Michigan, at Ohio State, Purdue? I don't, but don't think it's out of the question. By the way, another team that deserves credit, Rutgers, 4-0 after the win against Washington on Friday night. Greg Schiano, this is the first time they've been 4-0 since 2012. They actually play Nebraska next week. That's kind of a very interesting game. Nebraska's sitting at 4-1 after beating Purdue. And I think the one thing I'd say about the Big Ten, I don't know if those upper teams are as good as the SEC with Texas and Tennessee and Alabama, outside of Ohio State, of course. But that middle is getting better. Indiana is not a pushover. Rutgers is not a pushover. Nebraska is not a pushover. So we will see as things get deeper into Big Ten play. Really quickly, just a couple other results. First of all, the SEC, I don't feel like I need to say the Auburn thing. First of all, my best bets, they were 5-1. The only loss was the Auburn under when Peyton Thorne threw a pick 6. I know among the top 75 issues right now with Peyton Thorne, it's not my picks, but my picks went 5-1. Would have been 6-0 if it wasn't for the pick 6. Okay. But Auburn loses. There's nothing else to say. Listen, the quarterback situation is what it is. Tough day. Credit to Oklahoma for finding a way to win. But I thought Auburn was the better team for most of that game. Thought Oklahoma was, they did what they needed to do, but that pick 6 was a crusher. Credit Michael Hawkins Jr., his first career start. By the way, don't know if I should say it. Showed Michael Hawkins' parents on the TV on the broadcast. Mrs. Hawkins, I don't know what else there is to say. I'm going to keep my mouth shut. But the very, very nice looking family. Let me put it that way. It's, whatever. But Auburn gets the loss. Auburn, I'm sorry. Good news is you got to go to Georgia next week. So I don't know. Texas A&M beats Arkansas. Neither team played well, I thought. But Texas A&M, you look at that schedule. No Bama, no Georgia, Texas at home late in the year, LSU at home late in the year. Texas A&M, I think we could be talking about middle of November. Is that a playoff contender? Now, they got to get better play at quarterback, but they find a way to win. Lastly, producer Matt, by the way, let's see if we have any questions or comments. But lastly, do want to give a quick shout out. Army and Navy, both 4-0 through week 5 of the season. Very interesting. By the way, they both play in the AAC. So what's kind of crazy, there's a couple weird quirks on the schedule. First off, remember, they play their regular season finale, Army versus Navy, a week after the conference championship games, a week after the playoff berths or whatever. So we could have a situation where Army Navy play for a conference championship. In theory, I guess they could be the auto G5 team. Now, it's also worth noting, by the way, we'll get back to Army Navy in a second. Boise rolled in, they played Washington State on Saturday night. UNLV, it's worth noting, rolled in the post-Matt Sluka era. But to go back to the Army Navy thing, they're both 4-0. They're both 3-0 in the league. That conference championship game, they could be playing in the conference championship game, maybe to go to the college football playoff, then would play a week later in the Army Navy game. So it's funny. We spent all this time all offseason like, what if Michigan and Ohio State play and then they play again in the conference championship game? We could get the inverse with Army Navy. Okay. We could get them in a conference championship game, maybe to go to the playoff, and then they play a week later. It's weird, whatever. Producer Matt, before we get out of here, any quick questions or comments from today's show? Aaron, is it possible the SEC finishes with 5-11-1 teams? So it's not possible. I don't think that you could finish with 5-11-1 teams. What I do think it's possible you could finish with 4-11-1 teams, right? Georgia, no, you couldn't, because Georgia, well, no. If Georgia beat, no, you couldn't. Georgia, Texas, I guess if Georgia, let me see if I can do this off the top of my head. Producer Matt's fact checking me here. So Georgia would have to run the table to finish 11-1. They would beat Tennessee. They would beat Texas in that scenario. Then Tennessee would have to beat Alabama, and Alabama would have to run the table from there. Texas doesn't play Tennessee. They don't play Alabama. Alabama does not play Texas, as I just said. Tennessee does play Georgia, and Alabama, they don't play Texas. So that's the tinfoil hat conspiracy from Paul. This is what would have to happen. Be a four-way tie with Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, and Texas. Georgia would have to run the table. That would mean that they beat Tennessee and they beat Texas. Texas would have to run the table outside of the Georgia game. Tennessee would have to run the table outside of the Georgia game. And Alabama would have to run the table outside of a win against Tennessee. So that is the tinfoil hat. Could we have a four-team tie atop the SEC? It's possible. Good luck figuring out the tiebreakers from there. And I'll also say, I know it's early. I can promise you there is not going to be an 11-1 team from the SEC that is left out of the college football playoff. All four teams would make it. I don't care what hypotheticals we're talking about. All four teams would make it. There is no doubt in my mind. And by the way, the loser of the SEC championship game, which would obviously pick up a second loss, there's no way they'd be out as well. Any other questions? Great question from Paul. Another question, Jackson Arnold. Oh, we already have portal talk with Jackson Arnold. Okay, so Jackson Arnold was the starter at Oklahoma. Got benched. Michael Hawkins won at Auburn. And so Paul is asking, among the schools that are going to need a quarterback after this year, Auburn, Florida State, maybe Clemson, maybe Mississippi State. Think we can knock off Clemson. Clemson doesn't really use the portal. You may have heard of that narrative. But I'll also say this, okay? Here's a little take. I'm not sold that the Jackson Arnold era is done at Oklahoma. If you look at the Oklahoma game, and again, I hate to keep bullying Producer Matt. Producer Matt, for people who don't know, producer behind the scenes, is an Auburn alum, an Auburn season ticket holder, and has been at all 5 of those home games so far this year. But I bring it up because Producer Matt would tell you that Michael Hawkins only threw 15 passes on Saturday, only completed 10 of them. And so they're not asking Michael Hawkins to do too much, but I don't think this is how Oklahoma wants to play. The problem with Oklahoma is the O-line is beat up, and like their top 7 receivers were out for this game. That's a little bit of hyperbole, but not much, okay? So I just bring it up because Oklahoma was kind of in this tough spot where they have to do this because they need a quarterback that can make plays with their legs because all their receivers were hurt. Remember, their receivers, they actually had to move some defensive backs over this week, and the O-line is beat up as well. Producer Matt, if there's one more good one, we have time. My computer's actually about to die. Vegas now has Aaron in mind's UConn Huskies winning out, even 50% odds of beating Q's, going 10-2, earning bowl eligibility by November. What did I tell you? Tom Herman was gushing about Jim Mora's Huskies. UConn won 47-3 against Buffalo. They're dominating. They have 4 straight home games. They're 3-2 right now. Lost on a heartbreaker to Duke earlier in the season. They did get beat pretty bad by Maryland in the season debut. But 4 straight home games at 3-2. They could be bowl eligible before this homestand is done. And how about that? A 10-2 UConn has, but no, they're not good enough for the Big 12. Can't compete with Kansas and whoever. Baylor. Yes, they can. Give Jim Mora some real NIL money. Give Jim Mora all the money that Dave Aranda's spending. He's going to build a contender. He has already built one in stores. All right, I'll tell you what. I think I am going to get out of here, mostly because my computer is about to die. I don't know what happened, but it's time for me to go. By the way, shout out to Paul. Paul just said, great show today. And there's a couple others that have said very complimentary things. I appreciate you all so much. And I appreciate you. So I'm going to get out of here. Before we do, a couple quick reminders. Make sure you're subscribed. Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast, make sure that you are subscribed. By the way, couple quick things. One, if you do like the show and you do want to support the show, Collypuffs.com. Get your bag. They're delicious. That's one. And then also go to BlueChew.com. Use promo code Torres. They're going to give you a free month. All you got to do is pay $5 shipping. You're going to enjoy that product. You're going to enjoy the Collie Puffs. And we are going to get out of here. Thank you to everybody for listening. Time for me to go. Appreciate your support. Shout out to Torrin Craig. Shout out to Rachel, who hates my voice. Shout out to JJ Reddick. You F-head, unblock me. Be back Tuesday afternoon. new episode.